Okay.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this workshop on writing without plagiarizing. I want to introduce the team to you here. In fact, they're going to introduce themselves, starting with Susan. Susan, will you introduce yourself and explain why this workshop is important to you?
My name is Susan Dintoe, so I'll give you a brief introduction and why I got interested in plagiarism. I'm a PhD graduate from Memorial University of Newfoundland and currently teaching as a sessional instructor in Memorial University of Newfoundland, University of Toronto, Wilfrid Laurier University in Canada. In addition, I have taught at University of Botswana in Botswana, Southern Africa. So with these international experiences, I had faced challenges as an international graduate student. I was told my writing was wrong, but never told what was wrong with it. For example, I was referred to a writing center. I got confused when I was at the writing center because I was sent with no explanations. I also find that now as an instructor, international students are faced with similar challenges. Now with these experiences and challenges, I used to ask myself questions in my mind, just showing a calm face and holding my temper. For example, like, how was I admitted? Why was I admitted? Does this mean that I do not know English language? Or I do not know how to write? Do they know where I come from and what I am bringing into the program? I thought this means and shows that they are not interested in what I know. They just want to push me into their way of learning. Is it because I'm a foreigner? Yes, I am. And I know I have different ways to learn, but where is the equity, diversity, and inclusion? My morale was very low. I used to cry, think of going back, ashamed of myself, terrified, nearly lost my identity of what I know, in fact, who I was. Had sleepless nights, felt like being forced into something that they think as an international student. I wanted to use my own way to finish the degree quick, for someone to write it for me, or to copy because no one wanted to hear me. It was very difficult. I only later discovered that the main issue was not me or my English, but academic writing. Writing academically is different, and writing academically in Canada is different. I managed to persevere using problems as opportunities, and now here I am. Now I am on the other side as an instructor. And I want to help international students to work through these challenging systems. I see international students going through these difficult challenges that I went through, and I want students to know what they can do. Thank you.
Thanks, Susan. Kelvin?
Hello, my name is Kelvin Quintyne. I'm a doctoral candidate here at MUN. My research is in academic literacies, with a focus on student note-taking practices. It stems from my teaching experience. I taught for 15 years in the academic literacies program, what was known as the Foundation Language Program at the University of the West Indies, Cave Hill. And I am currently a tutor at Memorial University's Writing Center. I have seen in my teaching and tutoring career, many people at undergraduate and graduate level having challenges avoiding plagiarism. And I intend to find ways of helping students with those kinds of problems.
Thanks, Kelvin. I'm Cecile Badenhorst, a professor in the adult post-secondary program in the Faculty of Education at Memorial. My research area is graduate student writing, and I have a YouTube channel with lots of videos on various aspects of writing. Okay, so what we want to do in this workshop is we want to unpack plagiarism, but really from the student's point of view, rather than from the institution's point of view. We want to try and explain the institution's point of view, but look at this from the student's point of view. We want to try and provide techniques and strategies. And of course, in this recording, we won't be able to answer questions, but we hope that we will have answered them along the way. So the first thing we're going to look at is definitions of plagiarism. And the whole issue of plagiarism is sometimes very difficult to define. And that's because different institutions have different definitions and policies where they focus on specific things. You know, you could go from one class to another and find that the professor teaching in the class in one class has a different view on plagiarism to a professor in another class. And if you're working across disciplines, you'll find that disciplines have different approaches. So some people define it very narrowly, others define it broadly. Some professors don't understand it really well, and others do have a good understanding. So it's a very murky area. It's not as clear-cut. So it can be quite confusing. And then, of course, definitions of plagiarism and what counts as plagiarism differ across geographic regions and countries. So if you have come as an international student, you may find that the definition of plagiarism in your home country is very different over here. There are two main responses to plagiarism. There's the punitive response, and this is where plagiarism is seen as academic misconduct, where it's deliberate misconduct and deserves severe punishments. Other people will see plagiarism as mostly a developmental issue, where most students plagiarize unintentionally. And this is because they haven't used citations, they don't really understand citation use in academic writing, or they don't understand what plagiarism is, or they think they aren't plagiarizing, so they're deliberately trying to avoid plagiarizing and think that they've done that, but find that actually they are still plagiarizing. So unpacking plagiarizing from a developmental point of view is trying to help the student develop their writing. And that's really our approach here. We're trying to get you to understand plagiarism so that you can see what you're doing and you can make decisions around that. But institutions often use the punitive response, which is why it's really important to understand what you're doing. So the way students engage with plagiarism, there are two main ways. The first one is deliberate plagiarism, and this is where a student will decide, I can't do this myself, I'm going to copy somebody else's work and I'm going to present it as my own. So the whole thing is deliberate. But the most common form of plagiarism is unintentional, and that's where the student writer thinks that they have changed the work enough, but in fact haven't. In terms of consequences, no matter whether this is deliberate plagiarism or unintentional, most academic institutions have quite severe consequences for plagiarism. And as Susan described in her introduction, it can be very distressing to be accused of plagiarism, even in the mildest form. So you want to be aware of the consequences, and then we'll go through what you can do about it. So no matter what the intention, you could be removed from the program for academic dishonesty. You could be failed on a course, and that means you get 0 on your transcript and it pulls down your grade point average, or you could get grades reduced on a course. So the consequences can be quite severe. The most common definition of plagiarism is using somebody else's work without the attribution of a citation. So the attribution of a citation is providing a source, providing a reference, a citation. So using someone else's work without attribution of a citation and giving the impression that it is your own work. Susan, do you want to continue?
Thank you, Cecile. So I'm just going to give you a common understandings of plagiarism in the Canadian context and techniques that you could use to avoid a plagiarism. So for example, in the Canadian context, reproducing the exact words of a source text without using quotation marks and not attributing a source is called word-for-word plagiarism or verbatim plagiarism or cut and paste plagiarism. The other example is reproducing the exact words of a source text without using quotation marks but attributing a source. And this also is still called word-for-word plagiarism because the words still belong to the author. Then rephrasing a source text and not attributing a source. This one is called paraphrasing plagiarism. So when you are using ideas from a text cited in another text and not attributing a source, this is called plagiarism of secondary sources, according to Martin, 1994. Using ideas cited from a text and not attributing a source, this is called plagiarism of ideas. Or you can claim someone else's work as one's own. This is called plagiarism of authorship. For example, asking someone to write you an essay, according to Martin, 1994. Submitting an assignment for 2 courses or using text from one assignment in another is known as self-plagiarism. Cutting and pasting sources from another text as if you have read them. This is known as citing secondary sources. So these are just selection of ways you can plagiarize. So that is why it is very important that you understand what plagiarism is. Next slide. So techniques to avoid plagiarism. So we have just selected about 3 of them here. There are so many techniques to avoid plagiarism. So one of them is direct quotation. So now here we are in this presentation, we have used the APA 7th edition format. So the direct quotation, there are 2 types according to APA 7th edition format, short quotation and a long quotation. So for a short quotation is when the words are less than 40 words. So you use, you use the quotation marks and use exact wording in a sentence, and then you have to acknowledge the source, like as it is in APA format, Plum 2009, page 12. Now for a long quote, you can see the example here because it's more than 40 words. It's indented in a paragraph. So no quotation marks. So a source is provided as it is the name of the author, the year, and the page number. The next slide. So the other way of avoiding plagiarism is paraphrasing, usually at the sentence of paragraph level. So paraphrasing means restating the original in your own words. However, you need to do the following. You change some of the words, change some of the sentence structure, reference the original source with an in-text citation, and the same source has to be listed under list of references in APA 7th edition format. So now we have an example here of an original source, and you can see that it's a verbatim, and the source is in APA format, Plum 2009, page 11. Now the student in example 1 has paraphrased that original source. So you can see that it's in paraphrased, so it's not plagiarized. So the second example is where the student has just only made a few changes to the words, and the structure and the content still is the same. So this is still counts as plagiarism. The next slide. So summarizing. Usually summarizing here refers to longer sections or the whole article. So you can see here that we have a paragraph that has been summarized. So which means most of the words are changed. All of the sentence structure is changed because you are reducing the original into a smaller paragraph. So not all details are included. Then you can see that you acknowledge the source, Plum 2009. So I will pass you on to Kelvin.
Thank you very much. Problems with plagiarism often begin well before the essay is being drafted. Many students either do not write notes from what they read, or whatever notes they write tend to be inadequate in helping them to select, process, and then incorporate information into their academic work. So to avoid plagiarism when taking notes, it is advisable to do the following. Firstly, write down the source's full bibliographical information. if you get in the practice of writing the full bibliographical information for each source that you're taking information from, it becomes easier to, when it comes time to incorporate that information within the in-text citations and the references or works cited or bibliography at the end of your work. Also, if you practice rewriting most of the information you're recording in your own words through writing summaries or paraphrases instead of copying text verbatim, you will be processing the information in ways that can help you to avoid plagiarism. And it also helps with overall developing a more scholarly writing style. In addition, creating visuals such as tables, diagrams, concept maps, and other things with at least some of the information that you are recording goes a long way in terms of helping you to break up the linear structure of the text and put it back together in your work in ways that can help you to express the same information in a unique way, and thereby helping you to avoid plagiarism. And also ensure that you make clear within your notes what is borrowed information from your own responses to what you are reading. This can be done through using a different type of font or color, even putting your own responses in brackets. The key is ensuring that your notes are accurate in terms of what the author is saying versus your responses to it. So some of these activities take practice in order to be done well, especially when it comes to processing what you're reading using your own words. But putting effort into developing your note-taking skills will help you not only avoid plagiarism, but enhance your critical reading and writing skills for academic purposes. Next slide, please. So here are some examples of visual or nonlinear note-taking techniques. First one on the upper left side is a handwritten concept map. You can see that the student has taken not only the author's name and the year of publication, but also of the source. And this is the same for the spidergrams on the page on the upper left and upper right and bottom left, and also the table. The page numbers were included as the student progressed in making the notes so that later when it comes to incorporating the information, all the relevant bibliographical information is recorded. So this style of note-taking not only helps in terms of processing the information, but accessing the information quickly. And then when it comes to incorporating that information, putting it into students' own words in their final academic writing can be done in ways that can alleviate problems with plagiarism. Okay, next slide. So terms paraphrasing and summary, yes, or summarizing, can be used in different ways by many authors. So it is necessary to have a definition, and this definition is taken from Cecile and Defoe's 2008 article. So the terms paraphrase and summary can be confusing for students. Summary encompasses details of the whole text. A paraphrase rewords and reorders a shorter selection of text. In both paraphrasing and summarizing, a writer details a text content in his or her own words, but paraphrasing emphasizes a portion of a text, whereas summarizing emphasizes the main ideas of an entire text. So other strategies to help with avoiding plagiarism, you can always add a relevant citation. Remember one that you have actually read and keep the page number in your notes. You can cite as you write. Don't try to remember citations later in your paper as you your drafts. Always put in your citations. In addition, you can learn how to use citations in academic writing. There are many academic writing manuals and articles, various books out there that you can consult for help with that. In terms of your actual writing, you can begin a sentence with "the author argues" or "so-and-so argues," so that you have clear cues for the reader that you're about to mention the words or the ideas or the work of someone else. You can also change the sentence from active voice to passive voice or vice versa. This is a strategy that can help you to not depend on the exact phrasing of the original author's sentence. And another strategy that can assist in doing that is turning one sentence into two sentences. Okay, I now hand over to Dr. Badenhorst.
Thanks, Kelvin. Other strategies for moving away from the source text would be to free write. And what this means is that you read your source text, whether it's an article or a chapter in a book, and then you put it aside and you do a quick free write, which you wouldn't show anyone else, but a quick free write about what you've just read. So what will happen by doing that is you'll turn it into your own words. And that moves you further away from the source text. You could also use a plagiarism checker, a software that checks to see if your document is plagiarized, like Turnitin. A lot of institutions do recommend this, but you need to be careful because sometimes these software programs don't pick up all the plagiarism, and then you might think you're okay, and you have passages that are still plagiarized. But using a plagiarism checker is a good way to double check for yourself before you hand something in, and then you can make changes if you need to. Another strategy to move away from the source text is to use a paragraph format or a paragraph structure. And I have a video on this that explains it in much more detail. But just very quickly, a paragraph structure would be starting with the main points, followed by a few sentences that expand on the main points. So here you would elaborate, describe, provide examples, and then ending with a sentence that makes sense of the main points. So what you're doing in a paragraph is then you're combining a number of sources. That would help you move away from relying on one source. Another thing you can do is to write these summary statements. So you read an article or a chapter, put it aside, and then say, this paper is about, the most important point in this paper is, the authors argue, what I find interesting about this paper is, and if you write those summary statements, you will find that you're moving away from the author's words and into your own words. Another way of moving away from source text is to use the Toulmin argument structure. It's too much to go into here, but I do have a video on this. But this helps you to pull together a number of different sources in a structure, and you'll move away from the original text by doing that. The other thing we wanted to say is that there are always resources available at any institution. Most institutions have writing centers. you know, even if you want to just call them and ask a question, is this sentence plagiarized, or what am I doing wrong here? Or can you explain plagiarism to me? People are always willing to help. The library systems in most institutions and the librarians are very, very helpful. Most of these centers or units within an institution will have a web page full of resources. And if you can't find resources in your own library system, you could look at other library systems and see what they provide for you. There's a lot of material out there on how to avoid plagiarism, so you can always find something that can help you. So really what I'm saying is make use of the resources provided by your institution or your unit, your faculty, and find out where you can get help. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to just quickly summarize what we've done in this presentation. And then I'm going to go back to Susan and to Kelvin to provide the one thing that they really want to convey to you in this workshop. So what we've tried to do here is to explain what plagiarism is and how confusing it can be for a student to try and understand exactly what plagiarism is in a context where sometimes these definitions move around quite a bit and where people have different understandings of plagiarism. We want to look at this from your point of view. So really, what can you do given, you know, some of this confusion? What can you do? And the reason why we're focusing on this is because the consequences can be quite severe and they can be very distressing, particularly if you don't intend to plagiarize. So, you know, avoiding that kind of distress and unhappiness in your program is very important. So what we've suggested here is that there are three main strategies for avoiding plagiarism. Quoting, and quoting is where you keep the original words of the text, but you are very clear that this is a quote. It's in quotation marks. You cite the source and you provide a page number in APA formatting. The second one is paraphrasing, and this is where you're usually taking something specific from an article or a chapter, so a sentence or a paragraph, and you turn it into your own words by changing the words and changing the sentence structure. But you also provide a source. And the third mechanism is summarizing, and that's where you are usually summarizing a much larger text where you have to change the words and the sentence structure. Those are the three main methods for avoiding plagiarism, but we've given you a whole space of other strategies as well. Kelvin, for example, has talked about note-taking as a strategy. So focusing on your notes and having a process where you rework the material through your notes and then into your writing will definitely help you move away from plagiarizing. But other strategies would just be cite as much as you can. Don't have pages and pages without citing. Use the author's name, you know, so-and-so argues. Use any of the strategies we've presented here to help you avoid plagiarizing. Susan, what do you want to add?
What I want to add here is I think it's very, very important, and that's what I discovered, and that is why the students do what they do and end up plagiarizing. The students have to make sure that they differentiate their own ideas from the ideas they got from the readings, so that they should be able to know who to acknowledge in text. That is why it's important that in each paragraph, make sure that there's a source and you are able to know your own ideas from the ideas you got from the source. Because students have a tendency of saying that these are my own ideas. And when you read as an instructor, because you have read broadly, you can see that, no, these ideas are from the sources. So they should be able to differentiate the two.
Thanks, Susan. Kelvin? Poor old Kelvin.
Kelvin.
He disappeared right at the end.
Yeah.
Oh dear, and that went really well.
Yes.
Okay, Kelvin, do you want to go? Your final word.
Yes, just remember, plagiarism involves what you do during your entire writing process. So don't neglect putting in the work even as you're doing your academic reading. Try to practice making notes and developing your note-taking skills and how you incorporate those notes into your academic writing. And that will go a long way to not only avoiding plagiarism, but helping you to become a better academic writer.
Thanks, Kelvin. And yeah, I just want to reiterate what both Susan and Kelvin have said. So in academic writing, we write our thoughts through others. So the citations provide confirmation for our thoughts. And what Kelvin's talking about in terms of note-taking is seeing academic writing as an extension of yourself and your voice as a scholar. So the more you process the material and put it in your own words and then support it with citations, the more you will be developing your voice as a writer and then saying something about the material which will come from yourself. I think that's everything. Susan and Kelvin, are we done? Thank you very much, both of you, for your contribution. And I know we've had some problems with Kelvin coming and disappearing, but I think we've done this now. Thank you very much, everyone. And I'll stop the recording.